Okay, thank you for having me. Mike, that was a great introduction, maybe a little bit generous. So I'm going to be talking today about some specifics. So over the last 2 or 3 years, I've been, I'd say, obsessed with AI and its applications in content marketing, SEO, and PR. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you guys come away with some actionable and hopefully really useful ideas about how you can apply generative AI to automate some or eventually all of your processes. So Mike already covered a lot of this, but I'm the founder of Fractal. We do data journalism style campaigns, and we earn links at scale through that sort of methodology. So it's data journalism and then pitching high-touch content to major publishers. And over that time, I've overseen maybe 5,000 plus content marketing campaigns that have all earned press. And we leverage large language models extensively in many workflows, but always with the human in the loop. And that's the most important thing, because these models obviously can confabulate and make things up, and that's an essential point for anyone that's going to be doing this sort of automation. And then, as I said, I've been doing this sort of thing since 2018 and talking about it as well. So I did a blog, an AI-generated blog in 2018, using one of the first performant large language models from Allen AI to create a fake blog called "This Marketing Blog Does Not Exist." And so I've been aware, and I think a lot of you have also been aware of the disruptive nature of large language models and generative AI. And now it's even more obvious than I think it was back in 2018, but it's coming and it's transforming everything, and this industry is among the first that will be transformed. So today I'm going to talk about AI's role in marketing, from pattern matching to reasoning. So these models have grown and improved a lot over the last year, 2 years. AI agents as autonomous team members, a content paradigm shift, so evolving beyond keywords to intent and context. And then how do you effectively work with AI and navigate the balance between human and AI collaboration, letting the AI do too much or not allowing it to do enough. And then some actionable automation strategies, AI-driven content and SEO, real-world examples, and then some thoughts on the future of marketing and some things that I wanted to share that I think are relevant, that are not super well known, but are things that you maybe should hear. So if we look at the growth of large language models and their adoption, GPT-3 had 100 million users in roughly 2 months, which is the fastest growth of any product ever, as far as I'm aware, except for maybe Threads beat it after that. So far, actually, this is as of last year, but generative AI has generated almost 1 trillion words, so it's probably somewhere between 1 and 2 trillion words. I think it's about 100 million a day that Sam Altman said GPT was generating a day. And in 1 to 2 years, I think it's pretty clear the majority of content on the web will be AI generated. I think that figure is already around like 30%. So if you're wondering, these videos were created with Kling.ai, which is a new generative video model. If you've not checked it out, it's amazing. It's nearly as good as Sora, which has not been released. So when it comes to getting ahead, the way that I like to think about this is that the future is really about the commoditization of content. And so the question you should always be asking yourself when you're working with large language models is, am I creating something that other people could have created just as easily with a prompt and response from GPT? And if that's the case, then you're not doing enough. So the other way I like to think about it is, am I creating something that's actually information gain, so it's presenting something entirely new or relevant? Or is it just recapitulation of existing information, summarizing, and so on? The first is what you want. And then the big question in my mind is, what is the end game of generative AI and marketing in general? And in my opinion, I think it's near zero cost content creation. And maybe that's not for 5 or 10 years, but it is coming. So let's look back maybe 5 years. Limited, poor quality, expert development by humans. Almost nobody was using generative AI. It had very narrow applications. Things like "This Marketing Blog Does Not Exist," the the articles were really kind of crappy. 2 years ago, basic automation, large language models, getting better, could do some basic things, but still required human oversight. The challenge there was integration, and that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here. The impact of the first one was obviously minimal. The second, niche efficiencies. And then a year ago or so, we started seeing multitask agents, which are large language models put into frameworks that allow them to do more than just prompt and response. With that, you can do things like pipeline management, scaling, and process automation. And then today, where we're entering sort of a new age of AI with models like 1.0 from OpenAI that are actually incredible reasoners. If you haven't played with that model yet, I would. So they can now do complex reasoning. The human role is really more about guidance and instruction, or it's becoming more of that. And then the key challenges are autonomy versus control. So how much does the human participate? How much does the AI participate? How much is the human managing that process? And so the impact there is knowledge work shift. So this is transformation across knowledge work industries. Oops. And then 5 years ahead, and this is verging on speculation, but autonomous AI teams, strategic direction provided by the human. The challenges are governance and adaptation and industry disruption. And so maybe that sounds a little hyperbolic or crazy, but here are some of the reasons why I think that's true. So these are the model progressions on different benchmark tests for different language models, so GPT-4, and then O1, and then a human on the right here. So the right is PhD science questions, competition code, and competition math. And so, as you can see, these models are reaching parity with humans across almost every domain at this point. And then this one too. So if you guys have not read this is Situational Awareness by Leopold Aschenbrenner, who's an OpenAI employee. He doesn't work there anymore. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but he decided to write this incredibly in-depth PDF that goes really into depth around exactly why he thinks that the scaling of AI is happening as it is and what he thinks is going to happen in the next 5-10 years. So this is projections, essentially, of the orders of magnitude changes from essentially 2018, where we had GPT-2 was like a preschooler, to 2028, where perhaps we're going to have what I said in the last slide, like automated researchers, engineers. This should also scare you. So this is another sort of metric of the orders of magnitude improvements that we've seen. So ChatGPT, few minutes, numbers of tokens, a couple hundred, whatever your task is, it can do that sort of thing. Now with O1, we're probably up to the second level, so you can do thousands of tokens, up to 200,000 tokens at a time. That whatever task you're trying to do, that you might be able to accomplish a half an hour of work with that. We're quickly moving to a place where these LLMs from a single prompt and response could do the equivalent of multiple weeks or multiple months worth of work of one human. So this is the ROI timeline for generative AI use cases. This is a survey that Google put out around generative AI. And it's just a sort of a snapshot of the industry in terms of how people think this will be impacting them in the next few years. And although I think there are people who are adopting it now, you can see it's pretty small. In the sales and marketing, it's 33% seeing ROI now. That will increase, I think, to 100% in the next 3 to 5 years. And then these are some of the ways that businesses plan to use generative AI to automate and operationalize their businesses. So a big question for me is dead internet theory coming true? And if it is, what do we do about it? So if you haven't heard of dead internet theory, it's basically the idea that with generative AI models and their capabilities of being able to create such volumes of content so quickly at scale that eventually they'll inundate and overwhelm human content to the extent that it's not really viable to be searched or used anymore. So we're already seeing stuff like that happen with Google image search for baby peacock, and you see all the red ones are generative AI images, and if you actually analyze them versus a baby peacock, you'd see there's a lot of mistakes. And then bot traffic, obviously, is also increasing substantially. This was last year. The reason for this is because generative models can be bots, right? They can analyze information, they can assume personalities, they can converse with people and convince them that they're actual humans. They can pass a Turing test essentially in text over, relatively small periods. So if dead internet theory is coming true, what does that mean for marketing and SEO? So first of all, decreased organic traffic. I think a lot of you already see that in some cases, because large language models offer direct answers, reducing clicks to sites. So this is true of the changes that Google is making, but it's also true of people just, instead of doing a Google search, they use ChatGPT or another generative AI to answer a question. Selective click-throughs. So I think what you're going to get ultimately is less traffic, but the traffic that you do get from large language models will be hyper-relevant and very interested. Different verticals are obviously impacted differently. Those relying on things that generative AI is good at creating are going to be impacted first. And then, sadly, even less data transparency for marketers. These models are essentially black boxes, and you can extract some data from them, but not a lot. And then indexes, in my opinion, still matter and will matter into the future. We're always going to need some organization of humans' content and some way to filter it and search it. But the large language models will be using those indexes instead. And then data-driven standards. So I think content backed by data becomes a norm because these large language models enable essentially data journalism much, much more easily than was ever possible before. So I think the standards of what information game content or content worth ranking is content that will be data-driven and presenting entirely new information. And then this is an across-the-board thing. I think ultimately because these large language models can assume personalities and become bots, and that can be scaled, it's going to necessitate some level of verifiable identity and perhaps the growth of closed gardens over open. I think anonymity or pseudo-anonymity is probably not something that will be viable. And as I said earlier, is a perfectly efficient market the end state of AI plus marketing? I think that's the goal of this technology. It's not going to the next one. Oh, there we go. OK. So this is how I like to think about working with large language models. And I actually had GPT help me code this visualization. And it's a visualization essentially of navigating a latent space. So GPT is a huge model, trillion parameters, I think. It exists, all of its knowledge exists in this multi-dimensional space that you are navigating as you're asking it questions and it's answering those questions. And as you accumulate a conversation, you're moving it through that latent space to a particular spot. And some of those spots in that latent space are really amazing, right? They're perfectly tailored to your question or your need. Others are not. They're irrelevant. You sent it down the wrong path. It's not a good result. And that's why you see such variable quality of outcomes from people who are using AI. And so, yeah, you can sort of think of it as this is a conversation. Each of those dots is a turn in the conversation, and you're moving towards a specific location in the latent space. This is a game called Infinite Pizza, which I sort of thought was similar in its idea. So just talking a little bit more about how you can think about and get more out of large language models. Improved reasoning with agentic prompting. So one thing that I've been doing a lot lately is this sort of thing. I say, instantiate two agents competing to find the real answer and poke holes in each other's answers until they agree, which they are loath to do. Each agent has unique skills and perspectives and thinks about the problem from a different vantage point. And then I give it personalities. So if I'm coding Alan Turing as a top-down agent and Donald Knuth as a bottom-up agent. So giving them personality names like this, you are injecting some additional context, and the responses will be somewhat more tailored to whatever the AI assumes these people would have said. And then both agents, I say, have the ability to think counterfactually, step-by-step, thinking from first principles, thinking laterally. So giving it all of these tools on how it should think, and then having two agents that are competing against each other and checking each other. And because we have such large context windows now, this actually starts to work really well. And what you'll get when you do this is much longer responses where you have one agent giving an answer, the second agent evaluating or critiquing that answer, and then going back and forth until they've essentially agreed. So as I mentioned, the 200,000 token context window is something that you really need to be aware of when you're using these large language models. And depending on what you're using it for, I mean, if you're using it just for writing, then you might never get to 200,000 tokens. But if you're doing coding, it can get pretty easy to get there. This is called needle in a haystack, and this is a visualization of a test that's done on all large language models now, and it's a recall test. So it's examining out of how many tokens that are being generated, how accurate are those tokens. So this was for GPT-4. I think 4.0 is much better than this, and Anthropic is better than this as well. But through like 75,000 characters, you'll see its recall has essentially no errors. Once you get past that, then you start to get issues and errors. So keeping this in mind, it's important for you to always manage your context. So if you're having a conversation with an AI, it's helping you with a problem. If you get towards, above, it depends on the model, right? But above 100,000 tokens, you should probably go back into your conversation, delete irrelevant sections of it, and then start back from there. So the other part is critiquing your last answer in depth. Almost every time I have it do this, and a lot of times you'll notice it catches things. Provide counterfactuals and edge cases. For programming, this is incredibly useful. And then this one I've actually been doing recently. Use checklists extensively to plan. So what I've noticed is, especially when you're working with larger context windows, it can forget things. So forcing it to use checklists forces it to remember everything, because it's essentially writing down what it needs to do first and then doing it. And then broad to narrow. So leveraging AI's information synthesis skill, 200,000 tokens. I think there are some other models that go up to 1 million. This is where the value really is, extracting and synthesizing huge amounts of information. And then leveraging high-density information context. So with only 200,000 tokens, you want the densest information possible. So use shorthand, use tables, use whatever formats you can to have the same amount of information in a smaller context. So now I'm going to go into specifics around advanced pipelines that I've built and my brother Dan has built for internal use cases at Fractal. But a lot of these are going to be things that we share with the community as well. And I'm also going to give you guys 25 Google Colab like Python scripts, essentially, that do a lot of the things I'm going to be describing here that you can play with yourself and update and change yourself. So this was mentioned a little bit in the previous talk, but I think it's important to think about one input, many outputs. So this was a script I wrote that takes a YouTube URL, scrapes the YouTube URL, uses Whisper API from OpenAI to transcribe it, and then turns it into a tweet thread, a long-form article, and a summary of that article. So another project I worked on was creating long-form content from source of truth information. So this particular one, the way that it works is it uses the Google Places API, and it searches whatever location keyword. So in this case, Ithaca, New York, it goes to the location API, pulls as much information about that location as possible, sends all of that location information, like the businesses and the events and the hiking and whatever else. And then GPT analyzes all that and creates a long-form piece of content from it. And then I also added some additional features that extract relevant images and insert those. So you can imagine creating these more complex pipelines that do more and more advanced things. So the most powerful thing in my mind is combining a source of truth, so like a search index, being able to connect your AI to search, and then having it iterate over and over again. So this is another example of long-form article generation with semantic SEO understanding. And let's see if it will play. So the way that this works is it takes a keyword, it uses SERP API or data for SEO or one of the other SEO data tools, scrapes all of that information, and then does clustering on it. So pulls out entities, clusters those entities using sentence transformer, and then does visualizations of those at the bottom. So this next one is another little mini web app automation that we wrote that starts with an initial list of keywords and then uses those keywords to generate 200 long tail keyword suggestions. And then it selects the suggestions with the highest search volumes and then finds related keywords to expand the list. And so this sort of process, you can, as I was saying before, huge amount of information in, filtering it with the large language model, yielding something very interesting. So in this case, it's long tail hidden gem keywords that have low cost per click, high relevance according to the LLM. So keeping going with this, combining sources of truth, APIs, large language models, and iterative pipeline outputs. So this script is something that you give it a URL, it scrapes the URL, and then takes all of that information about the URL and sends it to like 5 or 6 different on-site SEO APIs, APIs around other data around the website, like Whois and DNS and other things. It also takes screenshots of the entire page, which you'll see at the bottom, and then uses GPT's new video or image analysis model, 4.0 Mini, to understand the page and give it like UI, UX recommendations based on that. So, I mean, this sort of thing took me like a day to write with GPT's help, and it's essentially like one input, a decent SEO report output. Another really valuable thing that you can do is creating retrieval augmented generation systems for either your internal teams or external projects. So in this case, we took the Google leak and put it into a RAG pipeline. And the way that this works is when you ask a question, a search is done of the corpus using embeddings, and then the closest embeddings, the ones that are most related to your question, are pulled out, given to the large language model, and the large language model answers the questions based on that source of truth information. So with this sort of thing, you get much, much less confabulation. In fact, very rare. So you can also do multimedia type things. So this is an app that basically you give it a search term, it goes out and it scrapes TikTok using Appify, which is a great tool for scraping if you guys have like weird sites that are hard to scrape. So it scrapes TikTok, gets the transcripts using the Whisper API, sends frame images to GPT 4.0 image and video analysis, provides output on exactly what's happening in those videos and what the transcript says, and then does some sort of analysis on it. So in this case, I said sociological researcher. So another idea, Reddit posts. The hardest thing, I think, for succeeding on Reddit is finding the right subreddits and then having the right title for that subreddit. If you're not a member of that particular community, you're probably going to get it wrong. But GPT knows about every single one of those communities. So you can give it an article as an input, and then it will go out and use the PRAW API, which is Reddit's scraping API. May or may not work anymore. And pulls out all of the relevant information and then makes suggestions around which subreddits would be most appropriate and what the titles should be for each of those subreddits. Oops. So another thing you can obviously do is, in this case, automatic frequently asked questions. So the way that this works is you give it a keyword, and then it goes out and it scrapes Google for like the auto response stuff, also asked, a few other keyword-related, keyword expansion things. Takes all of them, generates a ton of questions about all of those keywords, and then answers those, and then organizes it in a list. So this iterative process of connecting to an external source of truth, having the AI model analyze it, then do something else, then do something else toward an output. And then this is just one that I wanted to mention to you guys because I think it's very relevant to SEO. What happens when the majority of people are using large language models for getting their answers? You still need to know what your visibility is in those large language models. And as I said in the beginning, it's a complete black box. So this is a way to sort of gain insight into it. And what we did here was compiled the sources, essentially the training data sources that were used for GPT and a few other models. And so this allows you to search that. It's not really an AI-enabled thing beyond that, this is all AI-related data. But it allows you to essentially find those sorts of interesting insights. So this is another project, and a lot of these are Google collabs that you guys will be able to use or play with on your own. This is essentially creating semantically complete sitemaps. So what this one does is it does entity and relationship generation, and then it takes advanced metrics, so it computes PageRank and centrality and community detection, and then creates these essentially data maps of connections and edges between them. So you can really very easily, using large language models, create knowledge graphs, which can be used in lots of different ways. So automatic cluster evaluations as well, which I think was talked about a little bit in the last talk. Very useful for competitive analysis, keyword research, trend and social media research, and then data science. In this case, the way that we did clustering was scrape, collate SERP results, keywords or content, and then get the embeddings. So OpenAI has embeddings. They used to be really expensive. Hugging Face has all of the free models that you can use. They're pretty on par when you're doing embeddings, at least as far as it has been maybe the last few months. It might have changed. And then the amazing thing is you can do clustering with these. There's lots of different clustering algorithms that you can use. But the special thing is that you can then use the large language models to label the clusters. So before, when you were doing any sort of clustering, you'd get clusters, and the things in those clusters would be related to each other. But you had to say what that cluster was about. In this case, you can use large language models to identify and label the clusters, which can turn a project that would have taken hundreds of hours for a human into something that takes a few minutes. Other things that you can do, so iterative content creation, where you're generating, like say you're generating article ideas or keyword ideas. Start with doing something like creating a persona, and then generating ideas, inferring the personas based on the keyword, the SERPs, the metadata, their demographics, their psychographics, their affinities, their purchase intents, whatever else. Because these large language models have an understanding similar to humans, because they have all of human knowledge in them, or almost. They can do these sorts of things, fill out these huge data sets that enhance your ability to do your work as an SEO. Another one, automatic trend analysis. So this scrapes posts on Reddit by keyword, sorts by top, and then infers the primary topics and hierarchy as emotional activators, entities, whatever else you want that LLM can do. So this is an example really of data journalism and why I think a lot of content is going to transition to this sort of thing. I did this project in like maybe 3 hours. And what I did is I compiled all of the Trump incidences. There are over 300 of them. But I did this using a large language model. So like I could have gone combing through news stories and doing hundreds of searches to try and find every single one. Maybe there are a few places that had already tried to aggregate it, but it would be very difficult to compile this amount of information at once. But with a large language model, you can do that. So iteratively working with the model to find, list all of the Trump incidences over the last, 20 years, and then take that and ask it to list more that are unique that weren't in the first list. And keep doing that over and over again until you get a very large list, and then you can programmatically do fact-checking on it. So this sort of thing applies to anything, right? Like you could use a generative model to create a large data set that then can be visualized in an interesting way that becomes useful to people. And these things were, we had ideas like this at Fractal a lot, but we never really did them because they would take hundreds of hours to compile that information. So it was previously too difficult for one human to grow altogether. And it's a really entirely new avenue for creating unique content. Web crawling with content analysis and anchor text recommendations. Just another use case. I'm going to go quickly through these because I want to get to I know we're sort of wrapping up. You could do understanding brand visibility in an AI-first search environment. So this is, again, sort of like a LLM SEO sort of thing where I took a keyword and then I iteratively search, I use an LLM to create lots of different related keywords, and then each of those related keywords, I do searches in the LLM and scrape the responses from the LLM. So for instance, like asking content marketing or content marketing agencies, GPT is going to give me a list of agencies, right? I could keep doing that over and over and over again in lots of different ways, compile all that data, and then aggregate it to understand which brands are mentioned the most. And then some technical SEO things. You can give it raw HTML and get schema improvements and things like that.
In this video, I'm going to be showing you Canvas, which is a new interface within ChatGPT for both writing as well as coding projects. The way Canvas works is it will open up a separate window, and it will allow you to collaborate.
Okay. So things that I think should be on your radar. Agentic frameworks. So all of these things that I've been talking about today are in some sense agentic frameworks, which are essentially using large language models, sort of having them exist in pieces that work together. There are lots of different agentic frameworks emerging. AutoGen, Crew AI are two that I've used and found the most useful. There are lots of others. Some of them are really opaque and difficult to use. The OpenAI real-time voice API, if you guys have seen the automatic podcast creator that they released, which is amazing, and one of those ways that you can extend written content or video content into another format. But this real-time voice API is essentially allowing you all of that functionality that you saw in that podcast generator, but through an API, so you can create your own experiences with it or your own content creation pipelines with it. And they've also partnered with Agora and another company that I forget the name of, which are companies that help, they have APIs that help abstract a lot of the voice handling, like the live voice data back and forth, which makes it a lot easier than having to do that part yourself, which is very difficult. Kling and text-to-video APIs, like the first image in the beginning, are coming along. I think it's not that many years from now we'll have 15-year-olds making blockbuster-level movies with these sorts of text-to-video APIs or AIs. Dead Internet of Image results is already happening. Obviously, I talked about that earlier. Improving tooling and user-friendly agentic tools, something you need to be doing. O1, the latest model from OpenAI, I think it's important for you to use it and understand how this technology is different. because it's being optimized on its reasoning capabilities in a way that the previous models are not. Larger and larger context windows. The question here for me is, what is the upper limit of this? There are some papers now that show that it might be possible to have infinite context windows. And when that's the case, like, maybe we don't need a search index anymore. Suno Udio, if you guys haven't played with these, they create very high quality music from single prompt in any style. And then open source AIs are catching up. So Facebook has been leading the way in this with their llama models. But there are many others, and people are expanding and iterating on those. So they're worth trying because obviously they're free aside from the compute. And they are getting to the point where they're at like GPT-4 level. And then domain-specific languages are, I haven't gotten too much into this yet, but I think they are part of the future of helping AIs to really reason well. And then some AI breakthroughs that I wanted to mention on the next page. Yeah, sorry. So you guys can click on these when I share the deck. But yeah, I mean, so video generation, that's the paper that like Kling and these other video generations are based on, essentially. Music generation, diffuse role is the paper and the technology. DALL-E, obviously, AlphaFold. Reinforcement learning for scalable multi-agents. So this is things like GPT-4o. Liquid neural networks, which are crazy and too complex to talk about here, but they are a key for autonomous systems. New elements or additional elements to prompting, and using mixture of experts, so having lots of different responses from AIs and using them together to come to a better conclusion. Multi-token prediction, getting the AI to do more predictive inference with the same tokens. Probabilistic relational models, which I guess are important for finance and healthcare. I don't know too much about those. Binary networks, which will enable, or binary X and or net networks, which will enable mobile and edge data. So one of the big blockers to, I think, adoption of these AI technologies is that the really performant ones exist behind APIs, so you can't build really great apps that allow you to interact with them with your phone in real time. But once we get to the point where we can have these large language models that are super performant, that operate on the edge on your phones and other devices, then I think we're going to start seeing a massive improvement in adoption. And then these are the 25 automation scripts, but on LinkedIn I release these. I haven't been doing it recently because I've been working on a lot of these other things, but if you want to play with these, they're on my GitHub, or you can click them here.
Welcome our robot overlords.
That says, I welcome our robot overlords, just in case.